welcome to the Colbycast, episode 239. Thank you for joining us. Bonnie, Jordan, and I are back together today for part 5 in our Humanities Series. In addition to a discussion of how we use routine and accountability to help us stay on track in our studies, we discuss liberal education and its aims. We ultimately move on to a brief discussion of tragedy, touching on the Orestia and Oedipus trilogies and Aristotle's Poetics, which are all part of Colby's 9th grade literature course. We even appropriately find a way to bring in the incarnation. We hope that you'll enjoy the show.
Hi there, I'm Bonnie, Colby homeschooling mom of 4 lads and lasses, liturgical musician, popcorn, and podcast fanatic.
And this is Stephen, homeschooling father of 5 and chief homeschooling officer for Colby Academy.
And I'm Jordan. As a product of homeschooling, I'm proud to teach Greek and Latin for Colby online and serve as the Alumni and Public Relations Director.
We're back together for a continuation of our Humanities series. This is episode 5 in this series. The other episode numbers are 220, 225, 229, and 234, all of which, of course, will be linked in our show notes. So we have finished up the Iliad. Stephen, you want to give us sort of a orientation, point to where we are on our map at this point?
I've fallen off all of the things that Jordan is doing where he's got all of the stuff, and I've just been focused on literature, and that's partially a time thing for me, but also that's what my daughter is doing right now. So I have a motivation to keep up with what she's doing, so we can have those after dinner conversations, and they get a little heated at times. It's pretty fun.
I appreciate that. I think that's great. Jordan, what about you? Give us point to where you are in all this.
Yeah, I'm scrambling through all the subjects still, trying to keep up. And actually, I'm kind of looking forward to, by the time this airs, it will have happened, but to really kind of dig in deeply during the break, where I'm not teaching and I can really spend some long days, kind of how we started. My daughter and I started where we were spending a lot of hours each day doing Greek, as I mentioned before, where I'm teaching her Greek. And then also doing all the readings together, which have been a lot of fun. Reading out loud is kind of how we're doing it. But in the busyness of the semester, it's been a little bit more, okay, I have to teach or I have these meetings, so you read, and then I'll try to catch up tonight or whatever. And then we'd try to touch base talking about what we had read that day, but it doesn't always happen. So I think there's more value in kind of doing it together during the break where we're both engaged at the same time. So I'm looking forward to doing that. And then it's just, the subjects, I'm always amazed how they integrate so well with each other. So as we're reading history, it refers to what we're reading in literature, and it strengthens like the conception of what we're reading in literature. And then you put a lot of context around it when we get into theology. So I know some of the people who've designed the program and people who are tweaking it and all of that, but man, it's really good. That the value is in that. I think that it's all integrated. You're not just, on your own reading one book and you're like, I don't know how to make sense of this. It's reading a lot of books, and I think, man, it is so great for students to get this. I wish I would have had it when I was 15 or whatever.
Yeah, for sure. That is one of its strongest suits. And I think your experience is very relatable, how you're trying to do this with her, but you have all these other things that are among your obligations and demanding your attention as well. Is there anything else you want to say about how you kind of find your way through that or manage that on a day-to-day?
Well, it's routine. It's what we have these. We're having this parents group that we're meeting, and we have we're reading through that book by Jimmy Mitchell, and so much of what we all have in common is the routine, and how like establishing a routine and sticking to it, and the challenge that is. Like nobody does it perfectly. I've found out. And there are some very, very smart people in there, very successful in their professions, and they talk about it just like the rest of us, where they're struggling for blocking time for prayer, blocking time for reading, spending time with your children, all of that, and what a challenge it is for each of us. But I think that that is really the key. And we've one thing can throw you off, and what's important is, I think, to not just stop when it seems like it's overwhelming. Now we missed 2 weeks of history or something, and now how are we ever going to catch up? So I think you find the moments to catch up, and then you feel really good about it, almost like those task lists. If you and you start with the smallest one first, and you're like, okay, we got that, and then the next one and the next one. So that's kind of the challenge that we're in, and it's kind of nice to know that we're not alone in it.
Definitely not alone there. Like the breaking it down can help if we can even bring ourselves to do that. That kind of brings to mind, I've been listening to the Optimal Work podcast, Dr. Kevin Majors and his colleague. We've had Dr. Majors on the show a couple of times. I've been catching up on some of their recent episodes, and the whole idea of this tolerance, this frustration tolerance, comes to mind. Like, what do we do about that? And that idea of being able to tolerate that discomfort of that and work through it, I think kind of goes hand in hand with what you've been discussing in the book study group. So that
yeah. You had mentioned off air about the article that you saw, which is talking about it's the misconceptions of liberal arts, 5 misconceptions about the liberal arts. And I think that things like that are important to keep in front of you, because it really reminds you why you're doing this. Because I mean, because that's part of it. You start to lose the motivation, because you're like, why are we even doing this? Can't we just do something really basic and get through the year?
Sure. And it's all too natural to hit that, to just encounter the struggle of, this is really hard stuff we're studying. This is not easy. This is not mainstream. It's not any of those things. And so anything can serve as a sort of a sticking point to why are we even doing this in the first place. But I was very grateful to have an article cross my radar screen, so to speak, earlier this week. And it's a reprinted article from the CLT Classic Learning Test blog, their journal, their website, the title of which, as Jordan said, is 5 Misconceptions About the Liberal Arts. And I will link it in our show notes. And it was just a timely reminder, like, why are we doing this? How is this relevant, these studies that we're doing? And how, if we have students who are mechanically minded, or any sort of thing, whatever orientation they have toward whatever vocation or trade or skill or industry or anything like that, how the liberal arts have a place in any of it. So I've found it particularly well timed, and maybe it will be for someone else. So we'll link that in our notes.
I'm certainly finding a lot of need to have external pressure these days.
Yeah.
For some of these deadlines, like getting these readings done. So when there's a podcast coming up, of course, that's a motivation for me, or when my daughter has reached a certain point. But even we've had my daughter and I were taking some guitar lessons, just really basic stuff from one of the sisters at our parish. But schedules get all messed up, and it was just like once a week class, and all of a sudden, first several weeks, every day we've got the guitars out, we're practicing the chords that we're supposed to be practicing. Then we miss a Friday, and then we miss a week of practice, and then you miss another week of practice, and all of a sudden you're thinking like, okay, should I just stop? Because I'm so far behind. But then you think, oh, well, it's, I just don't have the time to do this. And it's like the sister's only asking us to practice 15 minutes a day. And it's like, well, how much time did I spend in the evening instead, running through the sports headlines and the clicking on articles in the Wall Street Journal to see what's going on. It's like, well, I could have pulled out the guitar and practiced those chords for 15 minutes pretty easily, actually. But having those things, like when I know I'm going to have to go back and sit in front of sister and say, oh yeah, I don't have any of this down because I haven't been practicing for the last 3 weeks. That provides a little bit of extra exterior sort of push to to say, okay, well, I can do this. I can make this a priority just to get this done. So maybe that's a, like Jordan, you're saying with when you're working through with your daughter, or I've got a daughter here that somebody that, I mean, maybe they can do it on their own, but it'd be better to do it to some of these things together. So
Yeah.
finding somebody to help, I think, is probably a big thing in homeschooling and in these sorts of things, just in general, just to having somebody other than yourself to rely on. Other people are really good at that. I know people who just say, I'm going to do this, and then boom, they're disciplined, they do it. But I can easily push things aside because I think I've got other things that I should be doing too. But
Yeah. Yeah, the idea, one of the misconceptions that people will see, it's with the thing, the word liberal. And I think it's most people now know liberal studies and liberal arts and things. I can't say most people, but the people in our circles, they know what that means pretty well. And it's meaning, if you don't know, it just means the like the free studies for the free man, because it's liberal in the sense, like, it's you're free to pursue these things that are not for, usually for utilitarian purposes. It's not just a skill, although it is involved, like learning languages, for example. You have to develop skills and things. And people may not realize, but Stephen is very well connected to maybe the person that really put this on the map, the founder of TAC. He writing the Blue Book, and this is what has launched a lot of this liberal education in the United States. I don't know if have you ever talked about that, Stephen, on the podcast?
I don't know if it's come up, but yeah, well, my father-in-law was one of the founders of TAC and was kind of the primary author of their book. And so I get to spend a lot of time, one of my first seminars when I was a student at TAC was with him before he was my father-in-law, of course. But we were reading this and then we were discussing it, and he was leading the seminar on it. So it was like, okay, this is amazing. I've got this guy who, is going through and really making these distinctions and talking about what the benefits are of this education for a free man, for freeing those things. And, today there's this, people like the idea of classical education. Back when they're starting that up in the 60s, it was much more not the thing at all. And it's interesting when they talk about the liberal arts, and just we kind of, as we discuss it, or I hear it discussed, there's even people kind of interchangeably use liberal arts, liberal education, classical education. All of those terms kind of get mixed up, but there's distinctions, I think, between each of those that can be made. I mean, because liberal arts traditionally just meant the trivium and the quadrivium. So it's learning about, grammar, rhetoric, and logic, and then, math or arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. Those are tools. So liberal arts are more like tools that lead into this greater liberal education, which ultimately is pursuit of knowledge, and yes, there's a lot of steps to this, but knowledge as opposed to opinion, or because a lot of what we get today is facts, and you have to memorize things. You don't really know why something is the case. You've just been told this is the case. But liberal education is gaining those abilities to speak, to reason, to speak well, and then to come to knowledge, and then be able to make decisions for yourself, to decide, is this true? Do I see why it's true? Or is this just an opinion that's being held? Maybe it's a true opinion, maybe it's a false opinion. But when you can reason like that, then you're free. You can decide whether this is something that's true and should be pursued, or if this is something that's not true or only partially true. But when you just have opinion, all you can rely on is, well, people say, that's where I think we got into the COVID. People got tired of this saying, well, science says. It's like, well, science doesn't often agree on things. So you have to be careful about that sort of thing. But we talk a lot about this, think a lot about these things here.
We do, and it was really helpful a couple years ago before one of the big meetings at Colby. Stephen shared some readings with us. One of them was the Blue Book. I don't know how much of the group read everything that thoroughly, but I did, and I'd been working at Colby for almost 10 years at that point, without really thinking much about what all this is. I was working at Magdalen also, which was always talking about liberal education and these things. And the more we dig into it, the more kind of fun it is. And I wonder if, so as you're describing, you are free when you have this kind of education to be able to make decisions. You've been free to see sort of like how to pursue the truth. And I wonder if that's like a Christian leap from what the words originally meant, liberal, because in the like classical sense, if you went back in history, this was all very practical, meaning the free person was not the slave, is what it meant. So they were free throughout the day. They weren't doing little tasks of carrying rocks and plowing fields and things like that. They were free to pursue these other kinds of studies, these higher studies. And now in that usage, would you say it's like we're saying it's the education that sets you free, sort of? It's like a different, like for them, I don't think it was setting them free necessarily. I think it had a practical meaning. They were a non-slave, so they could study this.
Yeah, it is. I think probably Aristotle would have gotten as close to the Christian view as, I mean, so I think a lot of people were just, when you read like the Socratic, the Platonic dialogues, with Socrates talking about things. So they're certainly the free men who have the leisure to stand around, walk around and chat about things. I think that by the time you get the clarity of Aristotle, he probably would be saying that it's man's nature to think and to think well. So in order for man to kind of do what he should be doing, you both have to have a level of virtue, which is kind of presupposes any of this liberal education as far as freeing knowledge. You have to have a discipline so that you can actually are not just a beast and can think. But then I think he would say that these tools, the ability to speak clearly, to the liberal arts leading to these things, actually kind of perfects man's nature. So I would say it might be a little bit, at least some of the Greeks and some of the ancients, I think, would have agreed with the Christianity that they become the most perfect and the most, well, having an intellect and having a will, those can be exercised the most completely with a type of, well, with a proper education that develops those faculties. So I think they might have taken it a bit further, but I would agree that yeah, for the most part, it's only the people who have freedom and who are free and have leisure who can do these sorts of things. The slave or anybody like that would in that time wouldn't have been able to pursue any of this. They're just acting, doing what they're told, basically.
Well, I think that's why maybe it's very fitting at Colby, is liber also in Latin means child. So there's this idea of you're still at home. It's interesting because like ludus, the Latin word that means to play is also school and things. So if you pursue the liberal arts after, like as an adult, you have to still work and you've got to do it as your side gig, basically. You got for most people, I think. And so that's why people at Colby, I think, have really recognized, who are sacrificing to let their children be able to do this, or their students, their teenagers and things, before they themselves may have to go into debt to do it. So, at Magdalen, the idea that Dr. Harn had, which it was he didn't really want students working a job even. He wanted them to take these 4 years and really, really use that as you have the leisure right now in your young adulthood. And but what happens though, just the nature of our system and our society is a lot of these kids when they got out, they have debts that they have to pay. So it's almost like they enslaved themselves for a time. And there's a better, in my opinion, there's a better opportunity to get this liberal arts part done from those years, ninth through 12th grade, while you're still at home.
If you don't, you end up like me, I guess, where I have to. Well, I mean, so I had my public school was pretty good for a rural public school in Wisconsin. We had people going to all sorts of different colleges and doing well on standardized tests, but I had to. It wasn't until I got to Thomas Aquinas College that I mean, so they were obviously working on things not intentionally, but when you're doing math and you're doing grammar, you're trying to learn how to speak well, to think well in all of these courses. But oftentimes, even it can be today in some of the classical schools, it just be you're picking courses or picking things to study because, well, that's what you do in this sort of thing. So you're just expected to do these things. But there is sort of that intentionality about well, either here at Colby or, if you're doing that again at Thomas Aquinas College or one of our great classical Newman Guide schools, there's an intentionality where you're seeing, oh, okay, now I see why it is that I'm studying Latin, why it is that I'm, writing these papers that should be not only present a logical argument, but be persuasive. Why am I studying geometry? Well, great practice of logic if you study Euclidean geometry as he laid it out, because you know, it's one of the easiest things you can see, where you've got principles and then you build on principles. So it's like you all agree these are the principles and the common notions and things, and then you can actually build arguments, whether it's proving that the squares on two sides of the triangle are equal to the square and the hypotenuse. That's all starting from a point is that which has no part, and a line is breadthless length, and these different principles. So all of these things kind of fit together and you see the beauty of it. But yeah, it's if you don't get started early, I mean, you're ready to start building those tools when as soon as you're starting to talk, right? And if the further you kick that down the road, the harder it's going to be. But yeah, you can certainly hone those skills very well especially when you're a high schooler, when you can start. I mean, you have to have the tools, even because oftentimes these great books that we've been talking about in these series are considered to be, well, they're part of classical education. They're the materials that people have been working with for thousands of years now. But you have to get to a point where you can actually read and think about these things before you can pick up the Iliad. You don't give that to your kindergartner and just say, classical education, go for it, child. You have to give them what they're ready for to get them up to the point. And then this is going to be the first pass through for a ninth grader. That's still pretty young to be addressing some of these issues, but they can do it. And will they have mastered it? No, you can come back to these works and that have lasted thousands of years or hundreds of years and keep going back to them and getting more wisdom from these teachers each time.
That's all such a groundwork. We're laying a groundwork here.
Yep. And in our conversations, and from those readings, I thought it was interesting to kind of distinguish between what came about after or during or leading up to the Renaissance. So literature and history we think of as classical subjects, but they weren't really. I mean, there were historians, Herodotus and those that we read, Plutarch and others. There were Greek historians recounting wars and great lives of people, but as an art or like a skill, it wasn't really there until later. So how do we sort out, and why are they all just blended together. So this series is called the Humanities Series, and humanities is different, I think, than liberal arts. Is that an important distinction?
Yeah, I mean, we were discovering that I think, Jordan, when we were having some of those, if I remember correctly, at least, that one of our patrons, so we're disciples of Saint Ignatius of Loyola here, and one of the things he did through his experience of at the University of Paris was he came to understand that you need to do things in the proper order, and you need to master them as you go along. And he combined kind of what we call the liberal arts. That was part of it, but he also saw the value of history and good literature, and then moving back towards philosophy, whether it's logic or natural philosophy, and then certainly going on to like the Thomistic, the metaphysics, and theology, basically. But to him, we kind of discovered, because we've had this discussion before, where the Bible fits in. It seems like ultimately you want to come to a knowledge of God, and that ultimately the source, the book, the Bible is one of the things that you're going to, that's kind of an end. So, we always start with the Bible, and it's there all the way through. It's our most kind of direct messages from the word of God. So that's focused on. But all of these studies help you to come to know God better and to delve into scripture more solidly. So, and it seems to me that the literature and history help a lot with that aspect, in addition to just thinking well and knowing theology and philosophy and things like that too.
Yeah, as we saw in like some of the research and the conversations that it brought out with Ignatius, he was almost radical. He was ahead of his time. There was a huge shift, and Pope Benedict has laid this out. I've probably mentioned it in podcasts before, but there's the idea that truth is being, which is what governed the thought of Western man all the way up until scholasticism started to die, which probably was starting to die because people stopped kind of believing that, or like the new thing, the spirit of the age, maybe even of Ignatius's time, was truth is what happened. It's true because it happened. So people started looking into that. And here, and if you hear it in Latin, it's verum quia factum, and from the word factum we get the word fact. And so it's this whole idea of like facts, like you were saying before. That's what we're still kind of focused on, is like just getting the facts down. But the whole world kind of shifted the way they thought. And there's a third stage that Pope Benedict lays out, which is truth because it should happen. Truth is what should happen. And we see this in all the wokeism stuff. But with the one truth is what happened, it must have felt just as radical to them, to Ignatius's time, as truth is what should happen feels to us today, dangerous even. And without getting into that one too much, because I don't have the answers for it, I think it's super interesting if you contrast Ignatius with Martin Luther, who went totally for the truth is what happened part of it. Hence, digging back into the origins of the church and the history of the church, and the whole German Protestant movement has been to go earlier back to saying, the Catholic Church went wrong here, and they try to find it historically, but the whole movement away from truth is being. Ignatius is the guy who was able to embrace both, to stay with truth is being, but also then bring in some of these subjects like history and literature that were part of this new movement in the world. And it's lasted. I mean, look how long it's lasted. We're still sort of doing that. So if you think of the humanities, those are those subjects probably. And I guess like they all kind of go together now, having been baptized into Christian circles. But the end being divine revelation in the Holy Scriptures, I think is really this is a very that's the most Christian thing in the tradition. So the early fathers even said such things as the liberal arts were what they would call in Greek, which I kind of like better than prerequisite. With the Latin word, we have pro paideia, paideia being training. So the thing that you needed to be able to study philosophy had been liberal arts. You had to get mastery in that so that you can move into philosophy. And for the Greeks, it ended there. But for the Greek Christians, it didn't end there. Philosophy became the propaideia of biblical studies and biblical theology. Theology was the study of the Bible. And that's all that it was at that time. It was the study of the scriptures. So that had to be the end. And Augustine says even, that the liberal arts and those things are valuable insofar as that they help you understand the scriptures better. And that's an amazing thing, because now we have a new kind of literature. So what we're reading in this Greek year, it has to be known, and we've emphasized it a lot in the podcast, was not necessarily inspired. And so it's like we do have an inspired text, which we're reading concurrently this year with it. And what orientates the whole thing is like a historical approach. So you're reading the book of Job, you're reading the oldest literature in the Bible, and being able to maybe contrast it with things going on at that same time historically.
Yeah, I mean, you can certainly see with Ignatius's teachings, like we talked a little bit about Aristotle, and his goal would have been probably metaphysics, the highest things, basically thinking about the first cause. He understood there would be one God. There had to be one God that was in which everything had its being, movement, prime mover, first mover, all of these things. He didn't have revelation though, so. So for him, the end was exercising your faculty of intellect. But we know that, we know our end is to know, love, and serve God. So we have to know, but that's not the end. The end is to love and to serve. So this is scripture again. We're perfecting our nature, or our mission when we perfect our intellect, but then use that to come to know God better and to love him. So it's basically, we know as Christians we can master our intellect, but if we use it to not serve God and to do worthless things in the world, it's in vain. So its value comes in that lifelong pursuit of how do I better know God and how do I better love him? So this is the Ignatian education, or the classical education that we talk about, is with this in mind specifically. You're not going to complete that by the end of high school, but.
Well, so that's probably a good turning point to come back to some of the texts that you all have been working through in your humanities studies this year. Jordan, you mentioned you guys are finishing up the Iliad, and you were working through Herodotus. You were mentioning Herodotus as we were getting warmed up for our recording today. And you said some interesting things about the different types of literature, and I know there's more there. So would you kind of launch in there and give us some of your thoughts in that area?
Yeah, the types of literature, it is interesting. If you just think from the perspective of the authors, they're writing to their own people. There was no idea of like, I'm writing this for other people. So I'm meaning the Greeks are writing to the Greeks, and they didn't see themselves as different from their audience at all, which there's an amazing contrast in early Christianity where you have apologetics, these apologies that are written by Justin Martyr and people like that, who are writing to not their community. They're writing to some official or something like that and trying to describe themselves. But for the Greeks, there's a lot that they would never think would need to be really interpreted and things like that. They would just understand because they're writing to other Greeks. And in the in the plays, we were talking a little bit about Oedipus before we started the recording, and I think it's really interesting that the Aristotle comments on the play quite a bit, and there's even literary devices that are still used today that come from Aristotle's works in his own analysis of these plays. So even though they were written to other Greeks, there's like this idea that a philosopher can penetrate the text even more than that. And Stephen, I know his yeah, I don't know if you've got anything to say about Aristotle and his sort of commentaries on these.
The Poetics is something that are all of our ninth graders will read a portion of it, and it gets into a lot of details because in typical Aristotelian fashion, he tears everything down to all of the basics. I mean, we read it partially for the when we get into some of the tragedies. It's kind of interesting to see because Aristotle will talk about tragedies being about invoking fear and pity. So it's again an important thing because we're looking at these plays that would have been performed. The tragedies that we're reading are plays. So there's singing, there's movement. It's like what we would have seen. And the goal of these things is to bring about an emotion, a cathartic sort of feeling, to draw out an emotion that you can feel. And so here's something that's just opinion, and it might not be true, but my daughter was telling me that the Greek plays would be something where people were expected to weep, to show emotion, even though that wasn't acceptable, like in a normal day-to-day activity. But when you go to a play, it was expected that you would weep with the sort of feel the fear, feel the pity for these characters as they're going through. So I think Aristotle's work then is pointing out kind of what needs to be done in a good play, or what is done in a good play that, or specifically tragedy, in those parts where he talks about tragedies, to bring out those emotions, to have them felt in the proper way, because like he'll say, if it's a good man who doesn't do anything wrong and all of a sudden horrible things happen to him, we're just enraged, right? I mean, that's not just. That's anger that we're going to feel. Or if it's a horrible man that has good things happen to him, we're like, that's again unjust. We don't. So there has to be this, like in Oedipus, where you kind of you see there's some faults. He's not a perfect man, and he's kind of trying to evade fate. And he's proud and says, like, if I find this guy who's causing this plague here, there's a plague going on at the beginning and they're trying to figure out what's the cause of the plague. And he's the cause of the plague, but he doesn't know it. And so he's saying, I'm going to take care of this problem. We'll do this. And all of a sudden this starts to be revealed where he's trying to figure out what it is. And it's revealed that it's him and the horrible things that he's done. And I mean, you certainly get it. You get the fear, you get the pity, because you're like, oh man, he messed up and he did all of these bad things, but he didn't know he was doing some of these things, So there's also this, I mean, you don't feel like good. He got what was coming to him. Yeah. So there's a little bit of that sort of and there's good conversations that can be had with that in a good tragedy, because even jumping back to Agamemnon, which is Agamemnon coming back from the war and his wife kills him. So it's less clear. I mean, Agamemnon sacrificed his daughter before he went off to the Trojan War for a safe journey. And, his wife is not happy about that. And he brings back a slave woman that is, and we know in the slave women that they're talking about are more than just washing clothes and things and he tells his wife, oh yeah, and here's this young slave girl, take care of her too. So you could see, we can have those discussions even where you see it's like, oh, this whole story is horrible about this guy coming back and his wife murdering him. But you can also have the discussions like, well, didn't he kind of have it coming? I mean, he killed his daughter and brings back a slave girl after he's been gone for 10 years and all, so you can have that discussion. You might not come to a firm conclusion, even in your as you're discussing in your family. But it's good to see to discuss it and be exposed to that, I think.
Well, yeah, and looking at Oedipus with the idea that, I've contrasted this a couple times only because, from a Girardian perspective, Oedipus, the victim, was innocent of the thing. Like it's all propaganda, it's all accusations that are just put on him, but the play shows him to be guilty, whereas Girard reads it, he says it's an exact parallel to the story of Joseph in the Old Testament, except Joseph didn't do all the things. The Old Testament reveals that he didn't do the things that Oedipus is accused of, but with Oedipus, he's guilty all the way through. And there's a book called Rene Girard, Theology and Pop Culture, that I contributed an article to, and I was trying to show in there that it was a sort of a divine plot twist, and I used some popular movies where there's a good plot twist in there to show that when Jesus was revealed as an innocent victim, that it was like a plot twist in the world, and this led me sort of to one of the editors. It was a horrible editing the process going back and forth with these editors that were editing the book. It was honestly, I won't work with them again, so I don't mind saying that that they were terrible. So, and part of it was they didn't get what I was saying, but they wanted me to tame some things down. So they pointed to this with Aristotle and Oedipus, this idea of what they were saying is like a revelation when Oedipus it's revealed that he's guilty or whatever. And this is the Greek term is anagnorisis is what it is. It's when the revelation, like the plot twist, happens. But my point was it's different than revelation in its true sense that reveals, for example, Jesus being innocent, where the centurion standing by the cross says, sure, he sees it, his eyes are opened. And what was going on with Oedipus, from my perspective and from Girard's perspective, is that anagnorisis didn't come in to reveal the truth, but to basically establish the guilt of Oedipus, that he was guilty of all these things. And it's got all that play has all the classical marks from the scapegoat. If you read the marks of the victim, it's got it all there, beginning with the plague at the beginning and the whole motivation of trying to figure out how to rid the city. Obviously, it's a person that's causing the plague, like Jonah. That's obviously a person on the ship that's causing the storms. So in the ancient world, they would look for these kinds of victims like that. And it's amazing to see the techniques the Greeks were able to come up with and write incredibly entertaining stories that I think I like that thought of your daughters, that it probably evoked and was expected to evoke these emotions. And like we've said before, the Greek columns, the Greek buildings were painted in these bright God. If you've ever, if you know some Greeks, they like their statues and their all this stuff still, but the colors, putting it in color and not looking like Washington, D.C., but looking like it was in color. If you could go back to the plays, and one of my most amazing experiences I've ever had was at the Getty Villa in Los Angeles, where we watched, I don't even remember which play it was, but it was a cool evening, and it was a Greek play that they put on with singing, with how you described it. But we good American citizens, we didn't cry out loud or anything, but I could see how, if you could go back in time, you might see all of this. And what is it really doing? It's reinforcing, from the Girard perspective, it's reinforcing that we need victims, that victims, whoever's causing the plague should suffer for it, should die for it.
And it's interesting a lot of these Greek plays are based on historical thing, like we've talked about with some of the Iliad. So oftentimes it's not like today where we just, make up Frodo Baggins, make up a world and then So a lot of these stories were historical and then legend, like, and I'm sure this is where Gerard's, a lot of the details get shifted, to preserve the innocence of the guilty. But then it goes through so many cycles. Like, so when you're getting to the Greek tragedies, then it's this historical thing that probably is passed down orally, and now these great Greek play, um, you know, Sophocles and all of these people are now making it into further, even modifying it to bring about the emotions they want to evoke when they perform this. But
Yeah, yes, exactly. And because there's all those layers until it gets there, but the distortions remain because as I was saying before, it's written to other Greeks. Like these things were performed for other Greeks. And you're not going to say you're going to tell the story that you weren't guilty of something, and neither were your ancestors. By the time you get the story and put it into a play, then it's already kind of lost. But we see it. You know where we really see it is I think with the Brothers Grimm stories and or stories like Hansel and Gretel. Like if you can kind of look back and say that it was based on something real, but what it is very terrifying when you pull the layers off and see, whoa, what is it? So there's different things, there's killing an evil stepmother, it's told by the end, but well, the witch is obviously the stepmother. Even my kids were like, wait, they killed their stepmother. Like different things like that, you can see it. But I think with the Greeks, it's more challenging because they were so sophisticated at layering onto everything and then making it beautiful and entertaining also.
yeah, and there's something about even the truth of, as you were saying, with the crucifixion, the death of our Lord. I mean, the fact that we have this story, we'll see if I can say this clearly. We still have to we are part of the people crucifying him. We have to have that connection to tell that story, because otherwise the story would be these horrible people that killed our God. They should be punished. They should be, but so if we were to take that route, it would be a horrible thing to do. We have to be able to relate with those guilty people in order to be able to kind of bear the story, I think.
That's a brilliant point. Exactly. Yes, we have to. And then you think we are all saying we are guilty and he was innocent, and we take part in that guilt, and we need redemption and forgiveness for it. That's the gospel. Like, that's the good news that we can be forgiven. And then if you contrast that with like if you can read these Greek myths and plays as the same thing, what they're doing is saying we're not guilty. That person actually did do these things that he deserves.
So interesting. One is layering on a lie so that you can live with yourself, and the other is laying on the truth so that you can live with yourself. You know.
Oh, what a contrast. Wow. Well, at this midpoint of the year, any other thoughts on what you've studied so far or what you're looking forward to as you continue on?
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to getting further with the plays. I think that will be. I read some of them in the summer before, just because you can kind of read it in one sitting if it's the same amount of time as watching kind of a long movie or something, and you can take it all in at once. And I think that will be really good for my daughter, is to, if we sit down and we'll read them. The plan is to read them as different characters. We'll read them out loud. So I'm really looking forward to doing that with her instead of with the Iliad. It's just this long thing that you've got to commit many sit downs to get through. So I think that'll be good for her, and I'm looking forward to that. I think probably the most, and then continuing with the religion course, the Father Lowe book for the ninth grade year is fantastic. Yeah, it's fantastic. I mean, I think undergrad doing any kind of theology or biblical studies would benefit from it a lot. But even I can tell with her, it's probably her favorite book that she reads. So my 15-year-old can really take it in and she remembers everything from it. So continuing with that is also something I'm really looking forward to.
Yeah. I have the Odyssey coming up for me, and I'm actually really looking forward to this because my daughter, who's reading these, has legitimate issues with the way women were viewed and treated in ancient Greece. And, Aristotle will be very explicit that women are less than men in his writings. That's what he says. So it's not just that it seems like these guys aren't treating women very well. Well, yeah, that was part of the culture, but the Odyssey is the book that stands out to me about domestic. So I have to reread it, but the domestic life, what it should be, because Penelope is so prudent and so wise. And I think you see this journey of Odysseus, who is kind of like the typical Greek guy until there's a change, though, I think, in seeing how man and woman in the domestic life complement each other and support each other and create this good thing. So I'm looking forward to having that discussion with my daughter, because so far she's just seen a lot of women being treated pretty badly.
Man, you know that contrast would be so awesome to highlight, to really zoom in on that, because I may have mentioned it, I don't, on this podcast before, but in the course on second century Christianity that I'm doing at Our Lady Seat of Wisdom in Canada, what we found when we really looked into the persecution of the second century Christians was because this Greco-Roman society could not handle the elevation of women to equal status with men. With St. Paul in the first century, St. Paul's already saying it, and that really, I think that honestly is one of the major factors that made them say this new society within our society, this kingdom within our kingdom, can't exist because because women are equal with men within this, and that really tipped them off to the fact that this is a different thing. And so the contrast, I think, if you looked in Greco-Roman literature all throughout, how women were treated and then how they were immediately treated inside the church, I think would be very interesting contrast.
Right. As Jordan would say, mark it down. We're gonna get that on our agenda for future conversations. Well, it's not mere coincidence that this episode is coming out on Christmas, and we talk about the incarnation as the hinge point and everything. So I like how it's working out with this episode coming when it is. In our show notes, we'll have a list of the episodes that precede this one in the Humanities series. And I'd also like to highlight episode 221, a survey and a starting point, especially for listeners who are new to the Colby Cast, who may have come to us here recently and look at our library of episodes and think, whoa, what in the world? Where do I start here? In that episode, 221, we cover a lot of ground on the episodes that we had recorded up to that point. Of course, now that's been 15 or so episodes back, but that's a far less daunting ground to make up than starting from the very beginning. So check our show notes for those, as well as links to the articles that we mentioned, including a link to the book that Jordan has contributed to. We'll have a link to that as well. Any further thoughts, guys, before we close out for today?
Well, I loved your bringing back or highlighting the incarnation, because if you're listening to this while doing some dishes on Christmas, or even if it's just in the octave of Christmas, yeah, what an incredible, unbelievable, almost reality that we have here in the Christmas season. So hopefully your comment is going to inspire me to make sure I spend some time during this Christmas season just really wondering at the incarnation. So yeah, thank you, Bonnie.
That's been a through line from both of you through these a lot of our Colby Cast conversations, especially through this Humanities series that comes up over and over again, rightfully so.
Yeah, and yeah, thank you for hosting us, even though we're all co-host, but hosting us for this series. It's been a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to seeing where it goes.
It's really my joy. I remain grateful to be a part of this. All right. Well, with that, we will close out for today, and we'll look forward to the next episode in our Humanities series and wish everyone Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. And thanks again for spending this time with me today.
Thank you.
Bonnie. Subscribe to the Colbycast on your favorite podcast app so that you don't miss an episode. And let us know how we're doing by leaving a rating or a review. And as always, feel free to email us at podcast@colby.org.
Mary, our Mother, pray for us. St. Maximilian Kolbe, St. Ignatius of Loyola, holy saints and angels, pray for us. Ad maiorem Dei gloriam.